Hello and welcome to today's stream. It's been a week, I believe. Hopefully the mic is picking up what I'm talking about. But today I want to do a quick dive again. It seems like covering three topics. Seems to be a decent format. Of course, not going into the most detail. But today, I'll take a look at Embracer Group, of course, which owns a wide range of game properties, largely through M&A instead of organic growth per se. And that having that big of a pipeline, and that many different IPs is an interesting contrast then to this interesting blog post from Riot Games about esports, and kind of how Riot Games thinks about having a very concentrated portfolio of intellectual property, right? Like League of Legends and its spin-offs like Teamfight Tactics, and then of course Valorant. But of course, if you check the Valorant, excuse me, if you check the Riot client, you won't see too much else. And then lastly, let's take a look at Opera. I guess I'm looking around at Opera, which of course has had a massive run. The stock has had a massive run. And President is a point of chagrin for me personally. I think it's nice to, well, like again, in the previous stream, thinking about how Vivid Seats compares to Live Nation, and how regardless of like whether you're which one you're more interested in, knowing about more about one of the two helps you know more about the one that you're most interested in. I think Opera, given it being a pure play browser, effectively, uh, how it runs its business, and certainly with the moves into like generative AI as part of some of its plugins, like here the browser I'm using today is excuse me is Opera GX. So certainly when we think about how AI tools can actually, or large language model tools can actually affect, say, Google or Microsoft, and the context and the experience of an opera helps share some light that can help you guide your perspective on how you think Google can make the most of AI. Like, is having Bard, Google Bard, as like it's a website effectively, and that's different. Microsoft has Bing AI directly embedded in the browser, right? So it's all different, right? And so again, taking it's not like you can interview the product manager or whatever business lead on those questions willy nilly. So you gotta take what you can get for context. And so Opera certainly helps provide some of that. But starting off with a Embracer Group, given how it like I think early released us its financials. And if you look at the stock performance, uh, had a pretty tough time. Yeah, I believe like in terms of its multiple, it's now degraded to seven times EBITDA, and seven times EBITDA isn't the most. Apologies about that, but a seven times EBITDA isn't an insane multiple, especially when you compare it to Take Two and Activision and EA. So of course the issue with Embracer is that it's only listed on like the Nordic exchange, and so it's kind of the same way companies listed in New York have higher multiples than the average company listed in London on the London Stock Exchange, which is why companies have debated or made noise about relisting somewhere else. So maybe that 7 times is fair, but certainly given where it was trading just over the summer from last year is a major difference. And maybe I do need to figure out my interactive brokers, see if I can pay some have to pay commission for the access to the interactive exchange. But actually, it is an interesting side project to take a look at. Yeah, I didn't realize it was at 7 times EBITDA, and of course, and that's from Cap IQ, so it's not whatever Embracer's adjusted EBITDA would be, which I imagine their adjusted EBITDA is probably full of all of these adjustments for like restructuring costs and goodwill impairments related to all their M&A activity. This is an interesting point. How Embracer apparently did have a partnership in the pipeline that did not materialize. Apparently, from what I saw from the CEO in some interviews, is like it was kind of like the night before something came up. So it's a bit strange. Capitalized costs, a good accounting jargon. Like if you capitalize something, you put it on your balance sheet, uh, right? Because uh, asset goes up, it doesn't count as an expense, so your share as equity uh, isn't affected by that. Maybe, well, definitely actually, don't quote me on that. By the way, it's interesting. I haven't seen anything that interesting as like who this partner actually was. I'm not sure who it would be. I think about the big players who it could be. Like, I don't think Tencent would be this would partner with Embracer. Maybe NetEase. I could see NetEase actually. Uh, NetEase maybe. I don't think any of the U.S. players would, because I don't think has 2 billion contracted development revenue. That's a pretty uh, significant amount. And so I think NetEase could. Sony Sony could. But I'm not sure how this ties into Sony. Certainly PlayStation uh, ecosystem. And then, like Microsoft, maybe I guess more content for Game Pass. So maybe Microsoft, maybe Sony, maybe Tencent, or maybe excuse me, maybe NetEase, not necessarily Tencent. Uh, that's kind of it in terms of like gaming players. Maybe there's some uh, wild like Netflix or Apple who have Netflix and like its games library. But again, like these games aren't like type of like indie mobile games, so it wouldn't be them. Maybe Apple, maybe Google, but then again, Google is Stadia pulling out. Yeah, so not really sure who this partner could be. But I mean, but again, to the point, like 2 billion over 6 years. So you divide that to be like 6, like 320, 330, 340 million a year. You know, and of course, then the actual upside of having that like good IP to develop an IP. Um, so it is a big deal. Um, but yeah, but again, like, it does go to show how consolidated the gaming industry is, and that it's kind of hard to know. But it's just a very limited number of people who could be that player. That's a decent size revision, like a 10% adjustment downwards. And again, it's adjusted. It's adjusted EBIT. You know, again, I haven't looked too closely at like the formal financial statements or whatever, but I'm very confident that when they do adjusted, like they are backing out some like restructuring costs and backing out some like goodwill impairments, especially goodwill impairments at this point, given that what basically Embracer, I'm pretty sure, was like using stock, uh, to, which is highly valued. And so then at that point, when you think about using cash versus equity versus debt, if your stock's very juiced up, why not use it to finance? So pretty significant. Game delays. Low single digit organic. Again, something like Embracer, so much M&A. There has to be a strong emphasis put on like what is organic and what's inorganic. Uh, I mean, this bullet point it kind of echoes like what like Take Two, of course, with Zynga, echoed how like the ad market's improving for mobile, tabletop. This is one of those like Embracer Group idiosyncrasies. Uh, Given how Embracer does own a couple comic book publishing, or Embracer does own some like not necessarily gaming directly related businesses like a card business, a comic business. So right, organic, right? You have year over year growth, but then you have organic growth. Right, organic's like what if your existing business lines are actually generating. Right, inorganic, uh, which again just goes right into your statements, is like the brand new companies that you're just stitching on top. Uh, if we convert, I'll do it off screen. But if I convert, something to note is how like net sales 37. Net sales in this quarter, the holiday quarter, was like 9 billion. So roughly, all these guys are. So it seems like within the quarters, there's a pretty decent like even split of like 25% per quarter, which is interesting because you think that so with retail, traditional retail, that the holiday Q4 or excuse me, not necessarily Q4 because I think many companies readjust their fiscal years to account for this. But with the holiday season being like a significant driver of revenue compared to say like the summer months, uh, whatever that holiday quarter is tends to have knockout or higher numbers. Uh, if we convert to USD, this many Swedish kroner or whatnot, krona is like 3.5 billion US dollars. And if we compare that, so it's 3.5 isn't bad. Uh, if we compare that, say, Take Two, which is like three, which is roughly similar. Apparently, let me check Cap IQ. I don't quite believe uh, what I just saw. So Embracer is at 3.8, or excuse me, 3.5 billion. It Take Two is at 5.3 billion. Uh, so it's and of course Embracer trades at 4 billion enterprise value. And Take Two trades at 26 billion enterprise value. So there's some interesting idiosyncrasies then, showing or that at least captures the difference in scale between these guys, between Embracer and say more larger publishers like Take Two. Interesting partnership pipeline, capitalized development costs. This Far Cry. I think Dead Island. Operating segments. This is interesting. You can take a deeper look at the studios. We recognize some of these, like Visual Bracer, when Bandai Namco like divested some of its games portfolio. I'm pretty sure Embracer was the one who scooped them up. That's good. You can see how many studios these guys have. Like 102, 258. different titles. Like that is 102 studios. That is insane. Yeah, it's like I'm not sure. I don't know how many companies are nestled within Berkshire Hathaway, but at a certain point, it's an administrative and managerial challenge, a significant one at that, to manage all this. And you can see kind of like a discrepancy and like who generates the revenue and like the head count, right? Like, of course, this is kind of unfair because like PC console games, it's like development cycle, so it's not perfectly matched. But it's interesting how large tabletop games comprise of sales. Um, then we have mobile games being 14% of sales in the quarter, but then when it comes to actual EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes, it's a third. But interesting to see where like the split. It seems that entertainment and services, uh, not the best margins. Back catalog, deeper dive into the PC business or like AAA business. Titles, IP, specific studios, Gearbox, THQ Nordic, Crystal Dynamics, probably some recognizable names. But again, look at my projects in the pipeline. Like 221, that is an insane number. Like even like a company like Take Two, which has like its private label publishing division, which will so Take Two is not they're not involved in only internally developed games, but this I mean this is like 221 titles. That is an insane number. And kind of hard to wrap your head around, especially given how top heavy the gaming industry is, and, yeah, and that's ignoring like live service games like Fortnite and League of Legends, and just thinking about like $60 whatnot traditional titles. Project ROI. Uh, yeah, nice. Find your meeting point. Yeah, fair enough. But yeah, it's interesting visualization that I think is very necessary to justify this many projects. Is having a graphic like this to show like what is your return on investment. So actually, this graphic I do appreciate. Mobile games, maybe you recognize any of these. User growth again. Uh, they did not mention user growth up here, but of course the mobile games right a bit more like skewed on like your age, both younger and older, and then like more gender balance. Uh, yeah, this is what I was thinking about, like how they have like tabletop games, right? Like they're involved with these guys, trading card game, adjusted EBITDA again, seasonality. Okay, just still talking to the tabletop. But again, right, just to point like how like it's administratively difficult to manage a business of this scale. Just on the investor presentation, right? It's a completely different format. So it's not the most significant thing, but it does indicate, uh, it does say something. Entertainment services. I've actually I don't know too much about this business line, but some companies that probably end up in the credit reel. Everybody has their gaming industry CAGR. Pick your number of choice. Of course, when it comes to gaming, it's it's definitely big and it's definitely growing, but it's not necessarily growing and big in the ways that come to mind most easily, especially in like the United States with the top heavy AAA. and console or PC experience, which is overweight, and the mobile experience is heavily underweighted. Headcount still going up. That kind of stands out from how other companies or game studios have been doing layoffs. It's good to see that the PC business, which drives the majority, or not a, a large chunk of sales, has positive organic growth, which again is probably correlated to when titles are released. Of course, mobile games having a third decline in its organic mobile business. And I mean, it's understandable given the noise that's been made about how ad market's been tough, but that is a bit concerning. Gross margin stabilization, OpEx expansion. EBIT margin declining. Go EBITDA, I guess, adjusted. Uh, Good on cash flow statement. Not that sustainability stuff is important, but we will skip past it in the interest of time. Kind of highlighting a specific portfolio as a case study. Interesting. Some balance sheet stuff to figure out if it needs to be write downs. Seems like I guess yeah, calculating the diluted shares outstanding. So I think these guys. Again, I haven't looked at this slide presentation before, so this is my first time. So I'm going through it at the same time as you guys. Okay, Dead Island. Metro. Of course, the joke is that Dead Island 2's development process was extremely long. Okay, so kind of talking about Dead Island specifically. Interesting what games to choose to put to underline the game cancellation development hell point. Interesting. They highlight these two games, and then these are probably two of the most prominent examples of games that are in development hell or never got that got canceled along the way. Okay, so this is very micro level. On it's micro level from the business perspective of just being on one studio or publisher. Uh, but even then, and then it's very macro, and it's not really talking about specifics per se. Right? This is kind of mumbo jumbo. Don't know enough about Dead Island 2 to know if the reviews match what they've said. 2 million copies, like uh, The Witcher 3 from CDPR hit 50 million today. To give and like GTA's 50 million copies recently. So just kind of show you how the games business, in terms of like actual unit sales, isn't uh, like there's some disparity. Let's look for adjusted EBIT. Uh, I guess I can't find it. But that is Embracer Group. I personally, again, to the point, like especially with like low cost, like zero commissions. Of course, to buy Embracer, you'll probably uh, end up with interactive brokers if you really want to own it. And so in that case, you will pay a commission. But generally, I think when I talked about Embracer in a previous video that focused on the gaming industry writ large, but I think at the end of the day, so like the novelty value of having so many, again, 220, that is an insane number. 221 games in development, of which 165 is still yet to see a light day. And of course, not all of these will be, some of these will get canceled. So it's not like the market's going to see all these games, but that's still an incredible number. Uh, and I mean, if you're like you Embracer, you have to publish that because why else do you have 10,000 people and 102 studios? Uh, but like, if there's anything, I think to take away from this part on Embracer, it has to be the slide to talk about how the headcount distributed, and then just like the amount of projects in the pipeline, just for PC and console, notwithstanding whatever they're doing in mobile and tabletop, and then their entertainment business. So it's so, I mean, so of course we compare right 3.5 billion for Embracer compared to like 5 billion for Take Two. So of course there's a scale difference, uh, but hey, if you can again just reading the multiples from Cap IQ, enterprise value, market cap plus debt minus cash, uh, gets you a $4 billion company. So I mean, Embracer trading at a bit over 1 times sales, 7 times EBITDA, uh, and of course, how much like stock you put in those numbers, how many impairments you think are coming down the line. But personally, I am actually pretty curious, actually, to take a look at Embracer. So, yeah, so we'll see. It is actually kind of interesting. Uh, so that is Embracer. Moving on to esports. Of course, on the Substack, linked in my link tree, which is found in my about page. Riot Games published this interesting piece from the esports. Apologies for apologies for that. Uh, apologies for that. I think I closed those tabs somehow. Yeah, maybe we won't get to opera today, but we'll talk about that later. But anyways, like again, it's interesting given how Riot certainly has some of the premier esports properties in League of Legends and less prominently Valorant. Of course, you can toss it Overwatch, CS:GO, MOBA, and of course like traditional like NBA, 2K, Madden, esports stuff. But a couple interesting points, which again I detailed more succinctly in my Substack, which kind of like picked out some highlights. I think some big interesting takeaways, like esports isn't an acquisition tool. It's much more so like an engagement tool for existing players. Uh, foundational knowledge of the game, I think, is interesting. Of course, as your point, you don't need to know how to play football, American football, in order to enjoy a viewing experience. I think like the Super Bowl and all the the poor talking points that the Super Bowl party kind of showed that point. But I suppose at esports it does work a bit differently with a slightly higher barrier of entry. Given how we're at esports, it certainly is more of a digital experience than an in-person experience, and so different dynamics. The entire previous point about Embracer Group having that many projects, but then you have Riot Games, and they're focused on like being narrow and having a very consolidated portfolio. It's an interesting contrast in strategy. The most interesting thing I want to highlight from this esports discussion, certainly with the context of this New York Times piece, which kind of talks about how like some esports has faced some challenges, uh, and I think the big part is like some of the assumptions that underpin esports just aren't true, such as it being a very mass market thing, or like this didn't pan out in actuality. Uh, and of course, with too much money chasing too few esports orgs or too many players, of course, then uh, economics don't work. But at the same time, right, like you have to work the hand that you're dealt. Uh, and so it's interesting to see how Riot has made adjustments to improve the economics. It's worsened its own economics from esports and made it better for like the esports organizations themselves, uh, which is interesting because it's kind of like how YouTube ends up paying YouTubers through AdSense for uploading content. Because ultimately, the ecosystem has to be win-win. And of course, the win-win doesn't have to be financial. For example, TikTok, uh, I think a pretty common or a pretty big distinction is the difference in how TikTok monetizes for its creators versus YouTube, which again is indicative of just a different stage of development. To use a poli sci more of a poli sci term between the two platforms and companies. Uh, but of course, but what it doesn't be financial. For example, TikTok probably makes the win-win work, but just giving creators such a wide reach, whereas YouTube get better dollar dollar values, but not as wide of a reach. But the point is, like any ecosystem, and any relationship has to be win-win. And so it's interesting to see how Riot has specifically taken steps and recognized that and made steps to make it more win-win. And certainly to a point right where Riot, like the esports org, while they are a middleman effectively, uh, like Riot does need them in the middle. The gap from broadcast revenue is an interesting one because certainly when you look at professional sports, the broadcast deals are a very significant driver um, of revenue, and if you don't have that, like you still have the rest of the costs effectively. Uh, as an esports team, you still have a lot of costs or cost categories as a traditional sports team, minus the biggest driver of revenue from the traditional sports teams. And so Riot does talk about how being able to sell digital goods is kind of a way to um, muddle the difference, and which is different, but it's probably a fair debate, I would say. Uh, how much can I really uh, fix the gap between the two? Apologies, I just noticed I didn't put a bullet point uh, on something. Those are high level points. I think the Riot blog post is very interesting, goes in more detail. But again, to the point, the high level takeaways of how esports esports fulfills a very specific role. It is not a general like you can't. You have to be Riot defined how they view esports and how it interacts with them. I'm not sure everybody has thought about how esports works for them. Of course, again, esports, there's a lot of different players, right? From like the publisher company perspective, from the esports organization perspective, from like the broadcast platform, like Twitch or YouTube perspective, and then like the consumer gamer player perspective. They're all different. So, but I think a lot can go unsaid and it's treated as implied. And so it's very helpful to have a specific example from one of the more credible names as to how the publisher or developer views esports and how they view it affecting their business and how why it is beneficial and how is it beneficial. Because I think if you read the piece, it's very clear that it's not a silver bullet that solves all problems. That takes your customer acquisition cost to zero. That makes your lifetime value exponentially greater. Like it helps with some of those elements, but not as much. And so I think uh, a bit more muted, a bit more consistent messaging. But then the big point then is like having to find win-win solutions, which is probably a pretty good concept to have in life and certainly in business writ large. Uh, and then yeah, like the recognition of just how the esports business model differs from traditional. And I think for me, like, you still have the same cost categories, but how you can generate revenue is very different. Um, so I think that is what I wanted to cover in today's episode. We talked about Embracer. Again, 221 projects in development. That is a truly impressive number, even if it's like 10, 20, 30% never see light of day. It's still triple digits, three digits. So, and again, I think Riot Games is one of the more credible people when talking about the games industry, certainly esports. So thank you for watching. Let me know if you in the comments if you disagree, have a question about these things, and of course, as always, like the Embrace Your Slide presentation and this Substack, which is then linked to like the Right Games blog post, will be in the description. So thank you for watching, and continue to be safe.